we just decided that we weren't as happy with that home on Linrose as we had thought we would be, because it had all the elements we wanted, except it was too close to our neighbors. So Gay Landress went out looking for us again, and she found the property on Louise Avenue, in keeping with the L names. And it wasn't the home we really wanted, but it had a nice big backyard, and we knew when we bought it, because it was a 3-bedroom, 1-bath home, and we knew when we bought it that we wanted to add on a nice big addition to it, using up some of that backyard we wanted, but still it was on a cul-de-sac and in a nice neighborhood, and had an enclosed backyard and a lot of trees, and we thought this would be a good family home. And so we moved when I was pregnant with David. So David and Julie actually were born, or David and Sherry were actually born and came home to the house on Louise Avenue, and that was their only home until we sold. The one thing that I think we did give to our children that I've always been happy about is a lot of stability. We moved around a little at the beginning, but you had the stability of same school, same friends, same ward, until you graduated from high school. And that was pleasing to us. That's really what we wanted, what our goal was. And not very many people are able to say that, not because their desires might not be the same, but the world changed. Not very many people could have done like Dad did and come straight out of graduate school and get a job and stay there until he retired. So it made a happy, stable home. And Julie was actually shocked when she first got married and realized that her husband only had a 1-week or a 2-week vacation a year, and that's all he got, because she had grown up with a dad who had a vacation in between every quarter, or when they changed to a semester system at the end of every semester, and summers off when he wanted them. A lot of flexibility in, not that we did anything spectacular, but we had fun as a family doing vacations and visiting the grandparents and just enjoying life together. And that was important to us. And I think it shows in our children's lives. I hope it does.
Okay, so you moved to Louise,
Mm-hmm.
and I guess you shared with the reasons why. How long were you there before the remodel?
Well, we wanted to remodel right away, but we always laughed and said, when we had the money, we didn't have the time, and when we had the time, we didn't have the money. But David was born in soon after we moved to Louise Avenue, because I think I was pregnant when we moved. And it took Dad a long time to get that addition built, but I remember David as a little toddler and a 2-year-old toddling around trying to help his dad. One time he picked up a extension cord that had been plugged in and then separated, and with his little hands he plugged it in and caught that little skin on his hand and got a little bit of a shock, which was pretty unsettling for us to realize that had happened. And he dropped a hammer, or else hammered, one or the other, and took a couple of chips out of the slate
Fireplace.
right in front of the fireplace. But you just laugh when your kids do things like that because it's just part of growing up. And with you, I think it was a great experience for you to work with your dad and learn to use a hammer and nails and get up and do whatever. Dad always had you helping when you could. I think he did a good job of teaching you to work, a good work ethic. And so we had a happy time building that addition on, and we had started to have having parties in our huge, even by today's standards, I think you'd have to say that was a huge family room we built. We built it especially for the kids because we wanted you to have a home where you could bring your friends and we could keep a little bit of control over your teenage activities. It worked out beautifully because we had a lot of parties with the youth of the ward, and that was where the majority of your friendships came from. And but we started having parties when that family room wasn't even finished, and with friends coming over, the Matheny's and the Smiths and the Waldo and Lila Rogers, that group that Terry and I said the Smiths, are really good friends, the Christiansons and such, that we enjoyed all those years in California.
Okay. So tell us about the what did you do in the church when you were, on Louise? Even back to Linrose, if we didn't cover it there.
You know, the only way I could answer that question is if I went back to my Christmas letters. Because Dad started out, as a counselor in the bishopric. Before that, he worked in young men, and then he became a counselor to Bishop Coons. And when Bishop Coons was released, Kay Clifford was made bishop, and Dad was the counselor to Kay. And I think partly why Kay served so many years, not taking anything away from him because he was a great bishop, but I think they knew, the stake presidency knew that they wanted Dad to be the next bishop. And we interrupted their plans by taking a year sabbatical and going back to BYU for him to get his doctorate degree. And so they kept, it was interesting because they kept Kay Clifford bishop all that time until Dad came back and was able to fill those bishop shoes, and then they called him to be the next bishop of West Arcadia and then Arcadia Second Ward when that change was made. And for me, a lot of those years, probably the majority of those years, I was the spiritual living teacher in Relief Society. And at one point, when Kay Clifford was bishop, Ruthie, his wife, taught one of the classes, and Lavina Stevenson was the wife of the second counselor, Lauren Stevens or Stevenson. It's been so long I can't remember. Maybe Stevens. Lauren, but whatever. And then I. So the three bishopric wives were the three Relief Society teachers, and then the fourth week was the homemaking meeting when they didn't have a lesson. They had a luncheon and worked on projects. So for a lot of years, and that's how I learned the gospel, because I started teaching the Relief Society spiritual living lessons when I really didn't have that firm a grasp on the gospel, but it took us several years, the way the lessons were outlined back then, to work through the Doctrine and Covenants. We didn't teach right straight from the scriptures. We had a lesson manual that was written by a BYU professor, and it was about the scriptures, and so we were really studying but went very slowly. And I had that distinct pleasure of teaching the scripture that was written just for our day, the Doctrine and Covenants, and I loved and treasured all those years of teaching that. And then later, when after we had come back from our year in Provo, I only mention that to keep the theme of what you asked me about the lessons. I went back, I was called back to teach Relief Society, but that's when they had spiritual living 1 week. Well, I guess they had that before too, but cultural refinement. But when I came back that second time, somebody else was already teaching spiritual living, so they called me to be the cultural refinement teacher, and we were studying different countries in the world and the cultural heritage that we gained from each country, and that was a great teaching experience for me too. And then when spiritual living opened up, they tucked me back into spiritual living, and along the way we used to have stake Relief Society boards that had a stake counterpart to every position that Relief Society had. And I was called quite young to, I say quite young because most of the sisters that served on the Arcadia's first Pasadena stake, before Arcadia was made a stake, they were wonderful, wonderful older women. The Relief Society, Stake Relief Society president I served under was Bruce Ballard's mother, Sister Ballard, and her first name escapes me right now, but I learned so much from her. It was such a privilege. But I was called right after we came back from our year in Provo, Utah. They called me to be the stake spiritual living leader, and that was a great honor and privilege for me to be able to work with all the sisters in the wards and help them prepare their lessons and give the insights I felt like I had to them. And then later I was called again a second time on a Stake Relief Society board, and this time the president was Lorene Steinley, Wayne Steinley's wife. And again I was called as the Stake Spiritual Living leader. So I had, for good or ill, I had earned the reputation for being a good teacher, and they utilized my talents in the ward, and I loved it. Later on, I remember when Bishop Baker came to our home in Arcadia and called me to be the Relief Society president, and I think I must have had a little inspiration letting me know this was going to happen without realizing it, because I remember a time or two thinking, I never ever aspired to be a Relief Society president because I thought my calling in life is to teach. But I remember thinking, if I were ever the Relief Society president, this is who I would choose for my counselors. And you know, it was interesting, when I was called, those were the two I chose as my counselors. And I think the Lord prepared me a little bit for that calling, because when Bishop came, I didn't refuse the call. I would never refuse a call, but I said, Bishop, are you sure? Because I'm not a president type. I'm just the teacher type. I'm so happy teaching that I feel like that's my call. And so I served 2 different times in the years we lived in Arcadia as Relief Society president, and loved. It was a very growing experience for me to be in a leadership position, because in a sense I'd been in leadership as like the Stake Spiritual Living leader, because I was working in a leadership position with the other teachers, but to be as the woman leader of the ward was a humbling but a great and growing experience for me. But those were happy years. We happy with Reed growing up and his trials in high school when he broke his leg, and then he broke his collarbone in a 24th of July sack race at the park that interrupted his football career. He played church basketball, and that was always a lot of fun. He went out for wrestling initially just as to help him be conditioned for football, and fell in love with the sport. You hardly won a match, I think, your first year.
I went to the district tournament never having won a match.
That's what I recalled, that he just, but his senior year, he just walked away with everything. He had learned in that junior year, walking in called never having wrestled or probably even watched a wrestling match. But he fell in love with the sport, and he was the district champ in his weight category that senior year, and that was a lot of fun. And he would turn me inside out to sit there and watch at such a close range. It's different, you're watching football and you're sitting up in the stands and your son's down on the field, but I could almost have reached out and touched him when I went to those wrestling matches, and oh, I loved him. I loved to be part of his athletic experiences and enjoy that through junior high and high school. And he carried on with his trombone through junior high school, and then said, but sports is my first love, and he was going to give up the trombone, and I was sad, but I didn't say anything to influence him, I don't think. And Mr. Hoare was the band director at Arcadia High School, and he had his eye on Reed, because if Reed was in the band, he had the whole first rank was trombones, and without Reed, they'd have to put another instrument. And the marching band was a great thing, and he wanted every one of those files to be headed by a trombonist. And so he talked to Reed and kept encouraging him and trying to win him over, and he finally said, you can play your football. He knew he'd never win him over in lieu of football. He said, we'll substitute somebody for you every time there's a football game if you'll just be in the band and be in the competitions. And so Reed learned to say, rightfully so, I play football for the love of the game. I'm in band for the glory. Because the football team did not have great seasons, as I recall, when Reed played, and his play was interrupted twice with injuries. But the band, he was our first one to actually participate in that award-winning Arcadia band, and we loved that they walked away with every competition they won. They won the All-Western Band Review, and they retired the trophy somewhere along the way. I can't remember which way was which, but Reed led the way, and David came along on trombone later, but David and then Karen played clarinet, and she played in the band, and hers was interrupted by our year in Provo when we went back to graduate school again for Dad. She spent her junior year in Provo with the Provo High School band. It was really a come down after the Arcadia band. But she wrote and asked I think it was still Mr. Hoare when Karen was in band, if she could come back and try out to be a princess, that he gave her permission. So we let her fly back to Arcadia in the spring of her junior year at Provo High School and try out for the princess. That they were the girls that wore the long headbands that went, the Indian headbands.
Mm-hmm. Headdresses.
Headdresses. I knew I wasn't getting the word quite right. Beautiful. Each had to make their own. So she spent a good part of her summer making her own headdress. But she knew when she was there for the tryouts that she had made the princesses, so that helped to take the little sting out of having to leave Arcadia in the middle of high school. And then while she was there, the Kiowas, they didn't have, the only clubs they had for students at Arcadia High School was a senior girls honor group that was called, what did I say?
Kiowas?
Is that correct? Is that what they were called?
I believe so.
I think so. For girls, and senior men for the boys. And Reed was made the president his senior year for senior men. And Karen, by coming back at the end of her, near the end of her junior year and trying out for princess, she was there at the school when they had their elections for who would be admitted as a Kiowa, because it was only seniors. And Karen was not only asked to be a Kiowa, but they voted, and she became the president of Kiowas. Even though she was a Provo student that junior year, they knew she would be back her senior year. But she never quite gave us that we took her away her junior year, because she wanted to run for student body office. And that was the one thing she would like to have done in high school that she couldn't do, because they had the elections in the spring of the year and they're campaigning, and she was back in Provo. But Dad had wanted for years to go back to school and get his degree, but we were parents first, and then individually fulfilling our desires second. And we just couldn't find a time to move our kids away from their growing up activities that were so great, both in the church and at school, that we waited until Reed graduated from high school. And then we said, most parents send their children away to school. We took ours away and went with him, but we didn't make him live with us. We lived on one side of the campus, on this west side of the campus, just close to the Smithfield house, and Reed lived on the east side of the campus in Deseret Towers. But he came home often. That was a fun year, because of course he went on his mission as soon as he turned 19. He was so anxious to go on his mission. But that year was fun because he would bring his friends down to our house often to watch our color TV for games, away games or whatever, just to come home. I think I did all of his washing his freshman year because he brought his dirty clothes home. I canned enough peaches, I thought, to last through the winter, and by November they were all gone because Reed would come home for a snack and pull out a half-gallon bottle of peaches, and I think eats the whole thing on the spot or close to it. And when Karen and her girlfriends, juniors in high school, there was a girl choice dance, a formal dance, and they invited Reed, and two of his roommates made the 3 dates for the 3 girls. And so Reed was good-natured and his friends were good-natured. Then they came to the high school dance, and that way Karen could go and her 2 friends and have fun, because her brother loved her and he was willing to step away from being a BYU student and go back to help her enjoy her high school experience.
In fact, at the homecoming dance, if I can interject there, just on that theme, Karen traded dances with the student body president for one of the dances, and that helped her become good friends with the student body president at Provo High School
Oh, is that right?
for the rest of the year.
I didn't remember that, but I always thought Karen and Reed had a sweet brother and sister relationship all the years growing up together, except when we were in high school. Sometimes Reed could come home like his senior year, and Karen always wanted to be a cheerleader. I don't think she ever had the opportunity or maybe even the great desire to try out for it, but she was always standing on a street corner coming home from school, doing her own version of what a cheerleader would do, and Reed would come home and say, "Oh, Mother, she embarrasses me so," because she's always dancing around, playing like she's cheerleading. But they were good friends, always good friends together growing up. And one time when they were young enough that they were still both in the young men, young women program together, they went as a group of teenagers downtown Los Angeles. I can't remember what they were going down there to see.
Probably Alvera Street.
It could have been Alvera Street, I'm not but sure what. So Karen got to do things that she would never have gotten to do if she hadn't had a brother 2 years older, because I let her go. She was one of the younger ones with this group of Arcadia, West Arcadia teenagers to go downtown on a Friday or a Saturday night downtown Los Angeles to see whatever they were going to do. And they were roaming the streets of Los Angeles, and there are homeless people and probably homeless kids that have left home, all sorts of things that you see in downtown Los Angeles. And there they were, and they stopped to see something that interested somebody on the street was, I don't know, doing something or talking that was interesting to Karen, and she wiggled her way right up to the front of where all the people were watching to hear whatever was going on. And when the person that was saying whatever he had to say finished and Karen looked around, everybody in our group had gone, in her group had gone. She had gotten left behind. Here she was down at 11 or 12 o'clock at night on a weekend night, and she didn't know what to do. And she saw a policeman, and her heart just soared because she was so happy, because she'd been taught that the police were there to help you. And she ran up to him and said, "I'm lost. I was with a group and they've left me." And the policeman said something curt to her. He wasn't used to dealing with nice young girls. He was used to dealing with ones who were the rebels and running away from home and doing things they shouldn't be doing. So she was just about in tears. She didn't know what to do. And on the other end, they were going to some place to eat. It was a Jewish place, and they were all excited, and they got almost to there, and they said, "Well, we better count up and make sure everybody's here." And they looked, and everybody in their group was there except Karen. And Reed and one or two of the other older boys, Reed's age, left the rest of the group, and they came back on the run, and they rescued Karen. She had not left the spot she was at. She didn't know what to do, and they rescued her. And so I just took that as, that was part of Reed's responsibility as the older brother, to keep an eye on his little sister, and that's why she got to do a lot of the things that she got to do. Otherwise, I would have said you have to wait another year or so until you're a little older. But I always knew that Reed was there to keep an eye on his sister, and so I left in good conscience, or let her go in good conscience. And I did other things with the kids growing up, all in that house on Louise. David had a love of Van Halen, and that was a little bit on the edge of what young LDS men did, was to like the rock bands, but he just loved the music. And he wanted to go, and he was in junior high school, and there was a concert with Van Halen downtown Los Angeles, probably in the sports arena somewhere, one of the big venues in Los Angeles. And he wanted to go so badly. He was a good boy, he was obedient, he didn't do bad things, he just loved that kind of music. I drove down to Los Angeles, took him and a junior high friend, dropped them off at the concert, went home, and came back down to where the concert was, and we had predetermined where I would park to pick them up, and it was like a Kentucky Fried Chicken place or someplace convenient that I was familiar with, and drove back down. They came out of the concert and headed right to my car, and I took them home. And I remember the next day at church, President Colford's youngest daughter, and I can't think of her name now, was it Kim? It was somebody else. And she was telling a group, and I overheard her saying, "I can't believe that Sister Gunnell ever did that." But she actually took her son, David, down to a rock concert and let him go to that, and then came and picked him up. She knew all about it. Word travels fast. And I just laughed to myself, and I thought, you have to treat each one as an individual. And I think by doing things like that, Dad and I accepting the fact that he liked to do things that were a little bit different than our two older children had done, but very important to him, kept him close to home so he didn't rebel. We made it all right for him to fulfill his desires. And when I saw how they stand up and scream at rock concerts, I thought I was pretty naive, but he never made me lose faith in him by doing that.
Talk to us about the road shows.
Well, those were a wonderful part for our kids and for Dad and I growing up. Marilyn and Winston Christensen moved into our ward when when Reed and who is the same age as Mark? Who were you the same age as? Doug? Of the Christensens.
I wasn't. That was David was.
Oh, well, when David and Mark Christensen were babies is when they moved in to the ward, the Christensens. And Marilyn is one of the most talented women I've ever known. She could have made it in show business, I'm convinced. She had a beautiful voice, she could act, she could do anything musically or dramatically. And I always loved her and admired her. They were among our best friends. But she set her own talents and her own desires aside while she was rearing her children. And so she would be the roadshow director. For the road shows were a big thing in Pasadena Stake, and then later when we were Arcadia Stake. And Marilyn always wrote and directed the road shows. And we did a cowboy western one. Do you remember what? Go West, Young Man, Go West. And Reed Wayne was the lead of the teenagers that was in that. He had the lead. And Karen was younger. She had probably a lesser part. But, and then we'd have big competitions. And they were good. And our Pasadena Stake had Dale White, who worked in the moving picture industry. He was a professional. And it was always between West Arcadia and East Pasadena who won the competitions. We had judges that came outside the stake, And I think we won the majority of them, but it was really close. And great, great road shows. And she would involve the young people, or excuse me, she would involve the married people. So Dad and I were in 2 or 3 of them, and Arlene and Terry. There would be a part for everybody. It was almost a family thing, and we would go to all those rehearsals. And then she had another one, what was the name of the fish one? The theme was like you were underwater and all these fish were there. And Reed again had the lead. She loved Reed. He could sing and he could act and he could dance. And so Reed was the Charlie Tuna, and Karen had some part. She was one of the girls, and I was the mother of the boy. And Lavelle Hatch, who had a gorgeous singing voice, was the mother of the girl. And the boy in this storyline is the boy and the girl liked each other, and I don't remember much about it, but it was fun. I was all dressed up in the big hat and the dress with the bustle on it, and singing with Lavelle Hatch. I guess I could sing well enough to sing in a road show. I never thought I had a solo voice, but that was a fun one that we were in together when Dad and I were in it. And then one that we took, we were actually invited. Our road shows were so good that we did the one with the everybody goes to the big party and they're eating, and the hobos, the bums, come in and crash the party. I can't remember the name of that, but they had ladies and couples in their finery, and I had this beautiful gown. Marilyn she could dream up costumes, and we were expected to sew them. I've forgotten the name of that. But the bishopric were all in that, and Arlene and Terry. And were you graduated by then?
Well, that was early on. I was one of the dancers in that.
Oh, that was one of the first ones then. I lose track of which was which. But, okay, so Reed was in it, and probably Karen too, because we used to go to all the rehearsals as a family, and it was a lot of fun, and our little kids would just go and watch us and listen and play, and we were actually invited on that one to come to June conference. And back in those days, the church had April conference and October conference, where you heard the general authorities and the prophets speak. But then they had a June conference, and that was devoted to issues dealing with young men and young women, almost exclusively. And so they would have roadshow productions at June conference. And Julie was a baby the year that we went, so that you were young then. But we went to June conference, and they used to have play church softball, and they would have competitions, state competitions, and maybe regional, and then if you won enough, you ended up going to Salt Lake City for the all-church competitions. And we went one year, and I think it must have been for a junior team. Were you too young to play on that one?
No.
But we took the whole family, so those were always fun outings. And